We had a look at some of the widgets we can use and at the widget catalog. And of course, throughout the course, we'll use loads of the widgets you saw there. So no need to learn them by heart right now. For the moment, however, I want to move on by now also moving my buttons here, my answer buttons, into a separate widget, into a custom widget. Maybe change the styling a little bit, maybe to give them a blue background and make them take the full available width. But that won't be the focus here. Instead, what I want to make sure is that we have real text on these buttons, so that we have text that fits to the question we have here, so that we continue working on this first basic application. And for this, let's create a new answer.dart file, which should hold the answer widget. And there we need to create a widget now. Now you could think that you need to create a stateful widget now, right? Because here in main Dart, on a button, we of course have that onPressed argument to which we pass a pointer to the answer question function. Now, just because we register a function here for an event does not mean that the raised button has to be in a stateful widget. Of course, we want to change some data when this event fires, when the user presses the button, but as it turns out, we can also trigger a function in another place of the app, even if this button lives in a separate widget. And that is a core concept and a core pattern which you will use a lot in Flutter, and therefore it's exactly the pattern we'll dive in right now. So here in the answer.dart file, I'll create a new stateless widget here actually, and I'll name it answer. And just as in the question widget, we need to import the material file from the Flutter package, because that unlocks stateless widget and so on. Now in here, I will leave the container because as a child of that container, I want to have my button, and I keep the container because that will allow me to control the width. So here the child is the raised button here. The text will soon be received from outside, and I'll come back to that. And onPressed, as I said, should change something, but will also make that change in another widget. And how that works is also something I'll show you in a second. First of all, let's adjust the width, and I'll set it to double infinity again, which is a helper property on the double object. Remember, everything in Dart is an object, so are doubles, and that is the core double type, which at the same time is basically the class for the, well, for the double value, you could say. And on this class, we have an infinity property, which basically gives us a value which tells the container to take as much width as it can get, which is the width of our device. So that's the width of the container. Now for onPressed, I'll temporarily use null again so that we don't get an error, and that we now can use this button as it is. I also want to set the color of the button here, and I will set it to a color by accessing colors. And colors actually is a class which also has some so-called static properties. These are properties which you can directly use on the class itself without instantiating it first. And there you have various pre-configured colors, and I will simply use blue. Now this can look strange because we haven't used that before. A static property, in the end, simply as I said, is a property which you can use without instantiating the class. If we have a look at the source code here, we see that the class here has these static const values. Const is something we haven't seen before. Let's ignore it for now. These static const values here, like black, and then a different shade of black and so on. And then if we scroll down, also different shades of white. So these are simply properties, normal properties on the class. The only difference is that you can access them without creating an instance of the class first. And such properties exist because we really just, we need that value here, right? And therefore this is like a utility feature of Dart, you could say, that we can get easy access to such a value without having to create a new instance. Instances of classes typically make sense if you want to create multiple different objects based on one and the same class. Here, of course, we want to have multiple different colors, but each color is just a value, like a simple text or so on. And therefore, of course, technically it's also an object, but we don't need the complex colors object for that. Colors, in the end, is just like a group of predefined single colors, you could say. So this colors class here exists not to be instantiated, because colors itself is an object that doesn't do anything. It just exists as a grouping mechanism around pre-configured values. A little bit like an enum, but an enum simply gives numbers, 0, 1, 2, a label, a human readable label. Here the idea is to have a human readable label for a more complex value, you could say. Because the value here is not just a number, but actually the hex code or the binary representation of a color. So that is what we're doing here. We're getting access to this static property here on the colors class, and this will give us the internal color value which Dart and Flutter can use to color this button. And with all of that, we can use the answer widget here in the main Dart file. For that, let's first of all add an import. You always need to import what you want to use in a file, because since the answer widget lives in a different file, in order to use it in the main Dart file, we have to import it there. And then with it imported, we can replace our raised buttons here with answer. And now here, of course, we create concrete instances of our answer widget class, because we want to create widget objects, multiple different widget objects, which we can use here. And that should be answer, not answers here. Now with that, if we save this, we now have our buttons there. Now they are grayed out because at the moment they're all locked, disabled, because I haven't assigned a real function to onPressed. And that will be the next step. And here, the tricky thing will be that this function, which I want to assign here, actually lives in the main Dart file, because that is where I manage my question index. And I have to manage the question index there, because I also have my questions in here, and I need to have my questions in here, because I want to pass them down to the question widget, which has no direct connection to the answer widget. So we can't manage the question index in the answer widget, because if we would do that, then we would have the value in here, but then again, we couldn't use it to select a question here, which we want to forward to the question widget. So our main Dart file is the common denominator, you could say, the shared widget between the answer and the question widget. Because our main Dart file and the widget in there, the My App widget, that is the parent widget of question and answer. It is the widget that instantiates and uses question and answer. And therefore, we want to manage our state, which both components need, or with both widgets need. We want to manage that state here in the My App component, or in the My App widget, and therefore also in the My App state, which is connected to that widget. This concept is called lifting the state up. You manage the state on the common denominator of the different widgets that need this state. And that is the direct parent of these widgets that need this state. So since we manage the state in here, we also have the function to change the state in here in the My App state class. But how do we now get access to the answer question function in our answer widgets here? The answer is pretty simple. Just as we can pass text to a widget, we can also pass the pointer at a function to a widget. So answer question, my function here, can be forwarded to the answer widgets without parentheses, because I don't want to execute my answer question function immediately when Dart reads this. Instead, I want to forward the pointer at this function to my answer widget. And now in the answer widget, we of course need to accept this as an argument to the constructor, because the answer widget here, that in the end is just a class, right? And therefore it can have a constructor. So here we can add a constructor by repeating the class name, and I'll use that shortcut for the constructor. And I will also add a property here, a final property. The type now is function, which is built into Dart, and as the name suggests, this means that the value stored in this property has to be a function, or a pointer at a function to be precise. And therefore here now, you can give this any name you want. I'll name this select handler, whatever you want to name it. And in my answer constructor, I now store whatever I get here in select handler. Now what I do get in here in my answer constructor is a pointer at the answer question, and this pointer is stored in this property in my answer class. And function simply means that what is stored here has to be a pointer at a function. And now since we have that pointer at a function, which is exactly what I need down there, I can use select handler here. Again, without parentheses, because the same thing as explained earlier still applies. We don't want to execute this immediately. And hence, now we should have a setup where we can trigger a function that's actually defined in a different widget from inside our answer widget, because we pass a reference to that function down to the answer widget here in our MyApp state. So with this setup, we should be able to save this. And now if I press a button here, indeed our text here changes, which means that this communication between parent and child works.